Welcome back to every naval battle in history. In this episode, we're getting deep into the carnage of the Diadochi period as vast empires controlled by a thin ruling class of Greeks contested and recontested the ruins of the Persian Empire. We're heading off to the Island of Kos sometime between 261 and 255 BCE. This shouldn't be a hard battle to date. One of the biggest wooden warships built to that time was dedicated to Apollo to celebrate the victory. Quite possibly the winged victory of Samothrace, one of the most famous statues in history, was built to honour it. And yet scholars to this day count and recount sacred games, in particular the Isthmian Games, sort of the Athletics World Cup to the Olympics, and argue when they think it happened, or what war it was part of. We at least have a vague idea of where. Kos is an island in the southeastern Aegean Sea. It's still part of Greece, although Turkey is no doubt displeased. The island is mentioned in the Iliad, so it's been an important settlement for a long time. The wars in question are the Cremonidean War, 267 to 261 BCE, named after the Athenian statesman who started it, or the Second Syrian War, 260 to 253 BCE. Let's step back further to what we can confidently establish. In 277 BCE, the Antigonid dynasty, having lost control of modern-day Turkey, managed to seize the merry-go-round of the Macedonian throne. This meant that either maintaining order in Greece, or maintaining sufficient chaos that no other grouping could unite Greece, was a key to their continued power and influence. And staying alive. Diadochi would think Game of Thrones was tame. Antigonus II Gonatas had achieved what his storied ancestors, Antigonus One-Eyed and Demetrius the Besieger, had failed to do in finding a stable base of power. The origin of his name Gonatas, however, is unknown to any source I can find. There is a Gonatas squid, but it makes its home in the Pacific and is therefore unlikely to have been well known to the ancient Greeks. He's a good king, pity about the name, although Gonatas the squid kind of works. On the other side of the conflict was Ptolemaic Egypt, and the highly competent Ptolemy II Philadelphus. Brother lover if you go by the current American meaning, although a more neutral translation, friend to his siblings, might be taken to mean he was notable for not murdering all his family, which was certainly a course very enthusiastically pursued by other Diadochi. In reality, it was a reference to banging his sister, Arsinoe, in setting the Ptolemaic trait of incest. Check out this bulgy-eyed, fat-faced hook-nosed pair on a coin they literally could have stopped being struck. It's Ptolemy II at the front and Arsinoe, his sister and wife, at the back. Imagine what they must have looked like for this to be an idealised representation. Ptolemy II was famous for extravagant personal debauchery, and while his win-loss ratio was pretty even in the wars, they were all fought very far away from Egypt, which is a good way to manage these things. The Ptolemies were all for restoring the ancient status of Athens, not so much because they loved Greek history, as because it made life really hard for the Antigonids in Macedonia. The Ptolemies were keen students of their own geography, and realised that Egypt was hard to invade from anywhere but the sea. They also knew that training and arming the native Egyptian population as soldiers was asking for trouble when you were ruling as a very small Greek elite. But as sailors, those Egyptians could be useful. And after the earlier disaster at Cyprus, the Ptolemies had allied with Rhodes, Athens, and the Phoenician cities to create a historic maritime dream team. They were dominant in the eastern Mediterranean through this period, and deep into the Aegean Sea, mostly through islands they held, which don't look so impressive on a control map of the area. This combined very nicely with the trade routes to the east they'd built, including a canal linking the Red Sea to the River Nile, complete with the world's first system of locks to manage the difference in sea level. So, with support and much egging on from Alexandria, Athens rose up to reclaim their independence, although would you bet your life on support from the faraway Ptolemaic Egypt? Corinth got smashed, Athens besieged, Possibly the Egyptian fleet sortied north, maybe to resupply them, maybe to counter the Macedonian fleet menacing the Syrian possessions. Antigonus Gonatas at some point had turned to Corinth to help build his fleet, including the colossal flagship named Corinthia. Incidentally, the first time in making this series I can recall a ship with a name. Corinthia was built supposedly with enough wood to make 15 other warships. Let's assume the yardstick here was an average sort of trireme, not a huge octores. That makes Corinthia around 700 tons, or the same displacement as the Mary Rose, the terror of the Tudor seas in the 1500s. That's the 1500s in our current numbering era. So Corinthia was a beast, and the king went in personal command on his super ship, bristling with archers, crew-served missile weapons, think catapults or ballista, and soldiers. Antigonus too intercepted the Ptolemies at Kos, and bribed their Rhodian allies to switch sides at some point, either long before or around the battle. Despite being outnumbered 2-1, his big ships prevailed, and some consider the battle to have marked the end of the Ptolemaic Thessalocracy, or Empire of the Sea. By the end of the Second Syrian War, the Egyptians had lost almost all of their earlier gains. For the Ptolemies, though, finishing up with a draw far from home was a fine result, as they kept building the power and wealth of Egypt at home, and kept sowing destruction among their rivals abroad. I'd like to apologise, folks, for the lack of certainty on this battle. It's a case where historians of later centuries appear to have agreed it was important, but not entirely why. Strap in, we've got lots more to cover as we take on every naval battle in history. Smash those like and subscribe buttons, ring that bell, you don't want to get left behind.